All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast, episode 33. I am joined today with Danny and also Kai Whiting, the author of Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living In. I'm Randy, and hello, both of you beautiful men. How you doing?
What's up,
I'm so
Randy?
much better being called a beautiful man. You just made my day.
There we go.
That's what we are,
So,
three of us.
today we're going to be talking with Kai, and Kai has written an absolutely phenomenal book. Danny and I both read it in less than a week. It was one of those books that you really can't put down. And I challenge
It
anyone
really was, yeah.
I would challenge anyone just to read the first chapter, because that's like the litmus test for any book. Like if the first chapter grabs you, it's a good book. And this first chapter at least grabbed me, and I just kept on reading and reading. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Kai. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. I must say I co-wrote it. I can't say that I wrote it. So Leonidas Konstantakos was the
Well,
co-author.
that's so nice of you for being generous enough to point that out. We were going to totally dismiss that and just say that you wrote it, but that's okay. We're going to give you all the credit, but now we're just stuck with this. No, yeah, it seriously was an awesome book, though. I think we were both really impressed. I had mentioned to you in passing that I really thought you struck an awesome balance between accessibility for the reader, for any reader, I think, and also like philosophical depth and value, which I really thought was cool. And I also just liked seeing how you worked through kind of your own stoic journey in the pages. It was really interesting. You know, actually, if you don't mind me asking, like, how did it all come to be? So I as I imagine it from what I gathered in the book, right? So you started sort of exploring stoicism, the book idea, and the sort of putting this into practice in your life was kind of all around the same time, or did it happen differently? Or
I mean, a good book comes to being pissed off about something, right? So I was pretty annoyed. Leo and I were pretty annoyed that basically you had two spectrums generally. It was either really academic or it really wasn't. And then even when it was a really good book, the focus was the dichotomy of control, which is literally Epictetus 1.1 of the Discourses, which means Stoicism 101. So we dedicated a lot of popularized books, and it is only popularized books with dichotomy of control, to lesson 101. It was like, if you don't understand this when you walk through the door, don't come in the door. So we're like, how is it possible that the majority, even if they're called something different, I don't need to name names, but how is it the majority of our focus in this is not in your control, but this is? It's like, well, yeah. They were like, yeah, duh. Like this is 101. Like this is it. You come in, and the first thing I'm going to say to you is some things in your control and some things are not. Understood? They would then nod their head and go, right, let's start at 102. I mean, and we have books and reams of material on that. Drive me crazy.
no, it's something that's really annoyed me about the whole popular philosophy books is so many of them don't really actually do anything. They really like latch onto one idea and they just beat the hell out of it for 200 pages and then do the same thing again and again. I don't understand how they keep selling and what these people think they're really getting into, because they're not reading any of the real sources, or nor are they actually exploring any of the lives of the individuals or the ideas in any significant way, at least in my opinion.
So that's how it started, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
It was
it's a good
that,
sign.
that was what it was. There was also there was a lot of Broics, which is a very useful portmanteau of men who were claiming things like Stoicism was only for men because virtue comes from the word via, which is man. It was like, yes, but that was a translation of the word arete, which means excellent. And the example the Stoics used, not only the Stoics, but which they did use, was the knife, which was neither feminine or masculine in any sort of real sense. So that was also kind of like to push back. So we pushed back against the idea that it was a white dead man philosophy, because Zeno wasn't white, nor was Cleanthes. They weren't really white people. The concept of white or whiteness didn't exist in any way that we'd recognize today. So we also wanted to push back at that idea, because Zeno's an immigrant, Cleanthes is an immigrant, right? So it was like, yes, this is just for Silicon Valley people. And we were kind of making the point that contemporary Stoicism, quote unquote, is a reflection of those who are writing it. It is not a reflection on the ancient Stoic ideology or ideas. I'm not going to say that Stoicism doesn't have any ideology. That would be a very superficial reading. And I'm not saying that my reading is the only reading of the Stoics or the right reading, but it was certainly like, well, it's just a mirror image. Even if you're Christian, your beliefs of what the Bible says more about you than it does about the Bible.
No, I think it's a good point. I absolutely agree with that. I think, it's if you're a philosopher, right, you're never 100% right. You can't ever claim that. So it's always
well,
up
you
for
shouldn't
grabs.
claim that. You could claim it, but you shouldn't.
Yeah, it's true.
Kai, one of the things that I really liked about your book was I've read a whole bunch of popular Stoicism books, and they all kind of rehash the same thing. I feel like if you've read one, you could pretty much say you've read all of them. But with your book, I learned so much more about Stoicism than anything I've ever heard in any other book. I learned about so many different Stoics, and it just kind of opened up Stoicism in a way that I haven't seen it before.
Yeah, that was fun. I remember you mentioned that to me too, because I was like, I never thought about that because I have read I've read the actual Stoics. So I was like, never really dawned on me, and I don't really read the popular, but yeah, it's kind of funny because they covered so many different individuals. That was excellent. I like that. And the way I actually like how you structured the chapters was really cool too, around each person.
Well, I think that Stoicism we have falsely in the academic sense said this is the early Stoa, this is the middle Stoa, this is the late Stoa. We don't do that for Christianity. It's just a way that we can classify certain ideas and group them together, which is what the academic philosophers love to do. But I think
Plato is the early, middle, late.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
So we wanted to show the journey, because a lot of people go, this is what the Roman Stoics believe. And like, well, where did the jump occur? And I had never read in a non-academic book where the jump had occurred between the Greek ideas and the Roman ideas. And it was like, no one had ever written that. And I was like, if you claim to know something about Stoicism, you need to know, one, where these ideas came from and how they transformed along with the societal norms of the day. Because that is fundamental, because then it will tell you why we shouldn't be going around quoting all the time as if I've been quoting Marcus Aurelius. Well, yes, but why did Marcus Aurelius say that? What was the context? And people don't really reflect on that. And that's not a criticism to the general public. That's actually a criticism to, again, authors that don't point that out. So we wanted to put Zeno right in the context, and imagine him sitting on like the docks going, I've lost everything. What do I do? Oh, I know, let's go to the Oracle. And people kind of ignore the Oracle. And I'm like, you keep saying that Stoicism is a male thing because you fundamentally ignore that the Oracle is the origin of Stoicism. It isn't really Zeno. And last time I checked, she was a drugged woman. So if you remove these stories, the Oracle, yeah? So
wasn't the Oracle, like, weren't they high on nitrous or something that was
basically,
coming out of the cracks?
Exactly. So they were drunk in the sort of, not in the alcoholic sense, but in sort of the trance.
They're on nitrous oxide is what they were on.
And people kind of like ignore that fact and they go, Stoicism is a maleism, right? And you're like, well, so it started with the Oracle, who was a woman. And we ignore that fact in the contemporary because we say, oh, well, that has no value. Well, if that has no value, then Oprah Winfrey has no value. And last time I checked, her bank account was pretty solid, particularly after her last interview. It's done really well. So to say that the Oracle has nothing to say because we no longer see any value in the contemporary sense is ignorant of our own stupidities in some regards, or our proclivities. Because the thing that's interesting to me about the Oracle is not that she was a trance-like woman, is that she heard from everyone. She was literally like the super connector of the day. Like, forget Oprah Winfrey. Like, everyone who was anybody went there, and you couldn't just rock up. We said this in chapter 1, like, oh, I'm talking to alcohol. No, you needed to have a really good reason, and you'd have to explain that reason. So that information is really valuable if you're going to tell someone how to run a war. Like, she wasn't completely useless. If you think about it logically, like, she's not just babbling on about something. She's actually got inside information. Right? Because everybody went and saw her. And people ignore that fact. That's exactly the kind of person I'm going to go to. I'm going to go to the person who's got the ear to the ground, and people are voluntarily giving her information. Of course, I'm also going to realize that if I'm smart, and I'm going to be careful about what information I give, right? Depending on if I believe there's any sort of spirituality, or I just believe that this is a really good way to advance my warlike general career, right? As in the general militant career. And people ignore that fact. So even if I want to take I just took a really cynical view, which I actually don't have, because I think the spirituality is important. But if I take a cynical view, which I think we should do, we should take the opposite view of the one we actually hold, she's actually really, really useful, isn't she?
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. That actually sort of touches on another question I had, which is how did you how did you go about reconstructing the stories of the Stoics? Because you just
So
mentioned
like,
here with with losing all of his possessions, going to the Oracle. Because I thought that was really neat. I really liked it from a reader standpoint. I thought it was very engaging. I was just curious how you went about constructing it.
So Leo did all the heavy lifting of the going through fragments because I'm going to be honest, I'm not a fragment kind of reader. Like, just isn't my thing, which is why I could not have written this book without him. I couldn't have done it. I wouldn't have wanted to do it. It was just too hard for me. My engineering brain was going, just tell me what you want and I'll do it. Tell me what you want and just give me all the pieces and I'll build the bridge. But don't ask me like why I need to, So I was thinking, give me all the fragments, tell me the stories, tell me what I've overlooked. So he was basically like a detective and he was feeding me all the sources, all the information and structuring it in a certain way. I was like, okay, how do I weave this story together that he just basically dug up? He gave me like the raw rock and I had to think like, how do I take this raw, the ore and how do I then process it into something that is, gold? How do I do that? Yeah. So that was that's how we worked together, which worked really well because we didn't kind of trip each other up or get in each other's way because it was very sort of distinct about who was doing what.
No, that's nice. Yeah, it's a nice project. I mean, the fragments are a bitch. They're very difficult to work through. They're terrible.
Yeah, you got to he loves that stuff. He loves
it. But it's just like puzzles. And it's very difficult. I don't know. It's tough. It is. Yeah, that's interesting. I really liked how you did it though, because I thought it was very engaging and it kind of got you into the world a little bit and allowed you to kind of see the practical value of this philosophy, why these individuals might have, sort of sought it out or found it, however it sort of played out in their circumstances. And also why they, I guess in general, why the society at large thought they were valuable too, these ideas.
We certainly tried. We looked at history books. We looked at Google Maps because you think Ukraine is quite far away from Greece until you look on a map.
Yeah.
And you realize you just one boat across on a lake, basically a small sea, right? So it was important. We literally did get maps to think, okay, what does this look like? What does the terrain look like? For example, we talk a lot in Stoicism about exiling somebody. The issue about exile, if you think about it sensibly, isn't that you're chucked in an area you don't want to be. It's that when you left the city gates, you're a dead man. If you survived that journey, you were lucky. Because once you left the city gates, which is why we talk in Stoicism about the ideal city, because beyond the city, beyond the gate is a barren landscape. We haven't got taps everywhere. We haven't got easy food access. And that's where the criminals, quote unquote, were. So when they banished you, they were not saying, I don't want you to be here, just go to another area that we don't want, because we don't want to see you again. It's like, I don't care if I see you again. I don't care if you die. In fact, do yourself a favor, go and die. Which is why we talk about the ideal, the city of the sages, because it's the gate is sort of the democracy, or as it were, or even the anarchy, but organized anarchy, because Zeno talks about the sort of organized ideal anarchy, not what we now call chaos. When you left and you were exiled, you had to pass a terrain which was certainly uncertain. You didn't know if you were going to arrive. You didn't know if you would find anything on the way. And you probably thought you were going to be robbed. I mean, that was quite a distinct possibility. So we always talk about, exile is not a bad thing. And you're just stuck in the middle of an island you don't want to be. It's like, no, you've missed the point. You've not done the thinking of what that actually looks like historically and how long that takes. And people think, well, you've got your backpack and you've got, your protein shake and you go off on your march and it's terrible and you just sit there and miserable in an island you don't want to be. No, you've got a 14-day thing. If it's summer, good luck getting water in Greece. If anybody's been around Greece, which is another thing that I did, you see that it's not a very hospitable landscape even now. So we tried to imagine how that would look, imagining the distance that someone would go from Athens to the Oracle in Delphi. And that gives you some kind of understanding. It's not just a simple process. So I think a lot of the times when we contextualize, we imagine ourselves doing that journey, which is why in chapter 1, we're like, stop putting yourself in other people's shoes. It is a lie. That's why I wanted to get that across.
No, I really liked it. And it's funny you mentioned that because we've talked numerous times on this podcast about how sort of easy things are now. In a lot of ways, like food is an afterthought. You don't even have to think
Well,
about what
most,
you're
I would
eating.
say most countries, because right now.
Well, yeah,
you've got
most.
Yemen,
I'm speaking actually pretty much I'm speaking from a very U.S. standpoint, I should say. Right now, that's what we were speaking about at the time. But it's gotten very easy to survive in a lot of ways that it wasn't in the past, and I think we forget that when we look at these ancient sources or even think about these ancient cities or imagine them. We put ourselves in that position, and it's really nothing like what it probably was like.
That's why we
I
say
actually
like.
had a question along those lines. So Stoicism was popular back in the time of the Romans and the Greeks, and that's kind of thought of as like a pinnacle society. Like things were very good at that point, although they were difficult as well. Nowadays in the United States, Stoicism is again getting popular and probably all over the world as well. And we are kind of at a pinnacle of society. Things are as good as they've been in a long time, like you've been saying, Danny. And so do you think that it's kind of these pinnacle times that actually draws Stoicism, or is this more of a coincidence, or is it nothing of the above?
Wealth, and vested interests. I mean, if you look at what what survived, right? Zeno's work did not survive for a particular reason. Plato's work survived. Why? Because Plato's work talks about the king and talks about the idea of you being the philosopher, i.e. the church, telling the king how to become wise. So the church has a vested interest. I'm not talking about a particular church, but they have a vested interest in Plato's kind of way of seeing the things, telling people that anarchy, as in organized anarchy, no rules, not chaos, it is the way forward. It isn't such a good thing. So I think always follow the money. And I'm like, is Stoicism popular because it helps, me, you, Randall, and Danny? Yes. Is it also popular because Silicon Valley kind of likes Seneca and they like the idea of being Marcus Aurelius because basically that's success and they haven't dug any deeper than that and haven't contextualized what they're actually saying or finding that, for example, Seneca is not in that book, is he? Because he's not a good example of how to run a principle. In fact, he's going to be in the second one about how to, once you've realized principles and you keep messing them up, that's when Seneca comes in, because Seneca is the biggest hypocrite of the ancient world. I mean, there's just no two ways about it, at least one of the best known hypocrites. So of course, Silicon Valley loved that. They're like, in terms of I can be hypocritical, I can be wealthy, I can be, audacious in pretending that my life's really difficult, and I'm making, I'm being resilient because I'm having oatmeal and coffee, and I'm putting myself in the shoes of the poor. And in Stoicism, there's no such thing as empathy. Empathy doesn't make any sense. You can't pretend to be somebody else. I can't pretend to be you, Danny. I have no idea what it's like to be American. I have no idea what it's like to have no national health service. I can imagine how bad that is, but I actually don't know. For example, I've been 21 in my life, but I don't know what it's like to be 21 now. I think it's really annoying when people say, well, I was 21 once. Yes, you were 21 in 1977. It was very different. I don't know what it's like to be 21 in 2021. So my experience of being 21 is completely different to your experience if you're born, 10 years later, right? If you're 21 during a pandemic, that's not easy. I mean, I had a really nice university life. They didn't right now. They don't even know if they're going to graduate. So I think the idea is, instead of trying to empathize, which is still about you, I'm going to put myself in your shoes. It's like, okay, just tell me how your feet, do your shoes fit well? No, why not? That's called sympathizing. That's called listening. And we don't do enough.
No, I think that's too true. We really don't do enough. I think because we do like thinking about ourselves first, and I think you made a good point too about Silicon Valley and this idea of wealth and finding in the philosophy a superficial reading that allows them to kind of continue doing what they're already doing, but making themselves feel better about it. I think there is a lot of that in popular philosophy too. And I had another question that was on that line of thinking.
I got one.
Go ahead.
So your book, the subtitle of your book is Stoicism for a World Worth Living In. What does that mean to you, and why did you choose that as a subtitle?
It was really funny because someone just criticized me going, well, your book's really idealistic, isn't it? Well, no shit, Sherlock. The title says it all, right? We talk about how Stoicism makes me feel better. feelings are hedonic well-being. What are we talking about? It's like we lost the plot here. So the idea was like Stoicism fundamentally was to make yourself better, to give yourself headspace so you could be a better person in the world. In fact, people were mocked and called idiots, right? If they were very privately focused individuals. That's where the word idiot really comes from. So it was like, what is Stoicism for? It's like, no, I want to be calmer when someone puts extra, I asked for oat milk and they gave me cow's milk in my coffee. And you know what? I didn't shout at the man. I was perfectly calm. It's like, what are you on? Like, you really, honestly, that is Stoicism in a nutshell, the way it's being applied. I'm like, are you?
Yeah, it is.
And we didn't want that. We're like, that's not what Stoicism is about. If you really think that you've done yourself a big favor because you didn't lose your, you didn't lose your calm, let's say, in the middle of a cafe, then you should grow up a bit, grow some, balls and grow up, or or breasts, depending on what your gender happens to be, and grow up. Like, if you're really going to lose it, you just say to them, sorry, I actually ordered oat milk. Could you just replace it? Thanks. It shouldn't even be like, oh, I'm so proud of myself. That's just not Stoicism, because it's an indifferent, just offer. Doesn't mean you shouldn't care about it, because obviously you've ordered it and you want your order to be right, but it's like, it shouldn't even factor into your day, right?
Danny and I talk about this all the time, about how, trying to be a better person, to make a better world, it's very difficult. And so like, while we're doing these things to become better and to make a better world, it's uncomfortable. And you talked about, Danny and I were talking about this in your book, how you mentioned just transitioning from milk, and you've done that, and you had a very nice analogy in the book. How is it that we can kind of use Stoicism, or can better become comfortable with this discomfort in becoming better?
And actually, wait, can I add to that too? Real quick? Hold on. Because I love how you think. It's always right in line with what I'm thinking. I was going to mention this fucking milk example too, because I really liked it. I don't know why. It just stuck out in my head. I think because it was just so carefully phrased. But one of the things I also like that you pointed out in this book over and over again was really how hard it is to choose the right thing, to do the right thing, to basically be virtuous. And then you look at all these philosophers who came up with these ideas and lived these lives. And this wasn't something they did in 7 days or 21 days. We joke about that all the time. A lot of the popular stuff now is like, do this for a week, do this for 14 days. It's like, yeah, you haven't done anything. You've just changed your schedule around for a week. You haven't really adopted any practice. You can't say you have a virtue because you did something a couple times. It doesn't work that way. And I think people miss the real difficulty in doing it, but I thought you captured it pretty well with that, with the milk example was very good too. Yeah.
We gave the milk example because it's so silly. It's such a silly example. It's such a typical sort of middle class issue, and one that, I've had to negotiate and deal with and be like, okay, so what do I do? Actually, now that I don't drink much milk, I get lactose intolerance. It actually affects my health, which is funny. I really love ice cream, and I really couldn't eat even if I wanted to, because I'm like, oh, that would make me ill. But yeah, it was such a silly and frivolous example, but at the same time tells you exactly how you have to think about the problems, regardless of what.
But I think that's what I liked about it, though, was that it's seemingly frivolous, silly example, but it highlighted the amount of effort and thought you're putting into literally every decision all the time. Because if you're putting that much thought into something so silly as, well, do I drink milk because it was offered to me at a house, and somebody's offering milk, even though I've chosen not to, drink dairy anymore, is that the right thing to do, to take the milk in this situation? And you're thinking of social relationships and other people and all this stuff. It really just highlighted the difficulty in these decisions that we really just kind of overlook all the time. And that's one of the things I think it doesn't matter what, it almost doesn't matter what philosophy you really end up finding your way in, but all of them that deal with like living a good life, they do speak to how difficult it is. It's time consuming. It's thinking about all your decisions, doing the right thing at the right time, which we screw up constantly. And I think people miss that so often, that it's a process. It's not really like, it's not like you're going to be, I'm going to start now, I'm 39, I'll be virtuous when I'm 42. It's not like that's going to happen, because things are going to change in life. There's all kinds of experiences. It's just, it is what it is.
We didn't want to promise anything. I think in the book, we're very careful to promise absolutely nothing. We promised absolutely nothing. We just said, you have yeah, it is. But a lot of self-help do the opposite. So they'll say things like, okay, I've used this example before, but I'll use it again. Like success, let's define success for a minute. Success is me getting toilet roll off the top shelf in a supermarket. How tall are you, Danny? How tall are you?
I am like about 5'10", I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Randall, how tall are you?
Yeah, 6 foot, like 1.8 meters or something.
Okay, so both of you tell me.
Meter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But a bit, but it's okay. Both of you are taller than me. I'm very short, so I'm 5'5.5". You see the half that. And you both tell me, you know what success is? It's getting that toilet roll off the top shelf. So I'm like, okay, Randall, what do I have to do? You're like, well, we go there, you put your hands up, and you grab the toilet roll. Right, that's success. So I'm like, okay, and I go, Danny, what do you have to do? You go, well, I'm just listening to Randall. So I do that. I'm like, I don't reach it. Like, believe that you're going to reach it. Believe, like, grow those arms. I'm like, but I am. But I don't reach it. Well, I am, but you didn't reach it. No.
Never give up.
Never give up. Yeah, you don't believe enough. No one told me just get a freaking step ladder. Like, get a step ladder and get on it and just get the toilet roll. Because we tell people that this is my success, and if you follow my success, you'll be successful, and it's just nonsense. So we said, no, go on.
Oh, no, I was going to say, no, I think that's one of the things that's been frustrating me recently. And we've talked about this too, but like, I feel like more and more. So I will say I recently got a puppy a few months ago, and he's awesome. And like, but you know, one thing I noticed is you look up anything anymore online or books for like how to raise a dog or anything. And it's like, everything seems like it has to be perfect. Like, you know, if you get a puppy book or you go online and watch these videos, you're going to be doing dancing classes with the fucking dog and shit and doing so much training and stuff. And it's like, well, that's not really what do I actually want this relationship to be? And I think it's, you know, not looking outside always for the answers, but also asking ourselves what we actually want and need in the situation. And then what's our resources available to get it and to make it happen.
Well, that's the irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
Self-help should be about helping yourself, but actually they tell you if you follow exactly what I do, you'll be successful. That's the opposite of self-help. So we wanted to create a self-help book by definition, like literally the definition of the word self-help. Like we will give you a framework that you will use to interpret your own life, because we don't know your own life. We don't know how to solve your problems. We don't even know what your problems are. So let's just give you a framework with some principles and some concepts that you can work with. And you go and run with it, and how you run with it is up to you. That's the definition of self-help. But most self-help books go, no, if you do exactly what I say, as long as you know what's in your control and not in your control, is everything's going to be great. I'm like, you're laughing at it because you know it's true, right?
Yeah.
It is. It's so true, though. Oh, my God. It's ridiculous.
You know, I like the way... So, I mean, Danny and I really enjoyed reading your book, and I like the way that you present each chapter, and at the end of the chapter, there's kind of a question or a few questions to where you can go into it deeper. And I found that like by actually taking the time to answer those questions in a journal, it helps really, you know, figure out the self-help part of it. And that's a really brilliant way to do it.
Yeah, it was actually really effective. I like that a lot. It was a nice tool. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was a nice tool to kind of keep you thinking about what you had just read in a reflective manner, which was really helpful.
I also would tuck it out of the way because some people wouldn't want those questions, right? And some people would want those questions at the end. So it's like, how do we basically give someone a tool that if they wanted to completely ignore, they could? Because I was like, we didn't want it to be like, you have to follow these questions either. Like personally, I don't like those kind of questions until I get to the end. So I would find it actually personally interrupting my flow. And then I would go, so I was like, how could I just chuck them out of the way so I could even serve my own purposes? I was reading my own book because I don't like to put too many questions like this in a way that makes you think too much about yourself until the end, because I like to read, well, when I was writing with Blair, we wanted to be like, let's give the questions that we've come through, like the process that we've walked through, or the things that we think Zeno walked through or Spheris walked through, but let's leave the self-reflection to the person in their own time, because we didn't really want to hold their hand too much. It was just like, it's there if you want it, and if you don't want it, then great. And that's the kind of, we also wanted to create a book where you could read one chapter, and if you didn't read any more, that was fine too, because it really irritates people when people say that you have to read the whole book. So, well, if you want, if you read chapter one and that's enough for you, then that's great. Like, I'm not going to force anybody to read any book, which is also why we wrote it quite short. Like, the biggest criticism we've had is it's really, really short. I'm like, Right.
I thought the length was awesome. Look, I'll be honest. I'm teaching a seminar on Nietzsche coming up in the fall. So I was ordering books, and I ordered 3 books from Oxford to review. I'm just giving you an example. 2 of them were like 150 pages. One was 550 pages. This guy just goes, and I was like, I don't even care what he says. It's not important. I'm not reading this. My students aren't going to read it. Moving on. Like, it's gotten to the point where I don't know. It's just like how much we both read an insane amount. I love reading, but at the same time, it's like, if you have a good idea, you should be able to present it in a reasonable amount of space where it doesn't get worn out, tired. And, I think you could spend, you could obviously make the book 1,000 pages if you wanted to. There's a lot of information, but you also, I think you made good choices, and you kept it a really good length where it was like fun to read. It didn't feel like a huge chore. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
We want it to be like an airport book. I mean, it would be a luxury if it does go into airports. But basically, if you got delayed, one of those really crappy delays where they kind of like, you're not long enough to have a nice hotel and a fast food restaurant voucher, but you're there long enough to be pissed off and think, ugh. So we wanted to go a book where you could go and go, and you could read it and actually enjoy the 4.5 hours, 5 hours that you were stuck somewhere. So we're imagining that person. We didn't really want to think, and then they've got to get on the plane, and then they've got to continue to read it, or because people. I went into me like you can sit on and read it on a plane. You can sit on that delay, but I didn't want people to take it everywhere they had to go and then make decisions about, I should read it because I wouldn't be like. It's 5 hours of your life. If you really, read it, you might go reflect, not the greatest reflection you've ever had, but you've got 5 hours. Can you read it in 5 hours if you're a native speaker? Yeah. And we also wanted non-native speakers to be able to be like, it's short enough for me to give it a go.
Yeah.
Because that's really important to me, being in Portugal right now, for example.
It's a good reason. And I love the length. I don't know. I don't know if I'm getting, it's just tired of the overly long, complicated stuff that I don't think does much help. And I think it's like those 2 ends of the spectrum. You get this really academic writing that is so dense, and unless you're really an expert in the area, in that specific area of philosophy, will make 0 sense to you unless you really do study in that area. Or you get these popular philosophy books that are so empty, there's nothing. And it's like, yeah. I feel bad for the people buying them, thinking that they're going to learn anything about philosophy that's valuable or that would even help their life. And it's like, I thought you guys found that middle ground really nicely that worked well, because it's very hard to get people to, it's funny. I see this in my classes all the time, because, it's like trying to show them and just trying to get them to think carefully about their own life and how. And one of the things I think you made a good point in the book was that each of us can make a difference in our own little area. And I think people have seem to forget that. I don't know if you, I teach environmental ethics a lot, and it's like one of the most depressing courses to teach right now, because things are just going off the rails, and no one seems to have any sort of responsibility. And I'm always telling my class, I'm like, well, look, why don't you do anything? And everybody says the same thing. Well, it's like these are huge problems. What am I, how is my action going to help? I was like, but if everybody has that attitude, well, it's definitely not going to change. That's 100% accurate. It will not change if we all have the attitude that my actions don't mean anything. They do mean something. They just might not mean as much as a government's actions, right? Or some huge organization, but they still have meaning and they still have value, especially in your community or in your area. And I really like that approach. Yeah, it was.
Well, probably because my main job outside of Stoicism is environmental engineering, right? So I'm really aware of that issue, and I have said to this, people say, oh, it's too big, it doesn't make it, won't make a difference, it's too hard. And I'm like, do you feel that same way when you do a push-up? I mean, it's not the one push-up that makes you have humongous triceps, right? Which are 2/3 your arm rather than your biceps. I know the biceps are pretty things, but it's your tricep that gives you a good arm. I mean, I've done enough push-ups to know that. So it wasn't the first push-up that gave me the triceps that I like to have, and the fact that even though I get 5'5", I have to actually wear t-shirts that are large, right? That's quite rare for somebody of my height. And actually now I can't even fit into large t-shirts anymore, which is becoming problematic. But it wasn't the first push-up that did it, and I never had that attitude like, oh, this isn't going to make. Do you know how many push-ups I have to do over like my life? I started when I was 15, right? No one has that answer when they go to the gym. I go, no, do you know how many push-ups I'm going to have to do? Oh, I'm going to have to do like thousands. Oh no, it's too hard for me. But we have that thing with environmental because we've just been brought up with this attitude like, well, I can't make a difference, right? But we can apply that literally to every single thing that we did. When I've learned my 3 languages that I speak, it's the 2 that I didn't get brought up with. It was every word. Like I have a policy that if I don't know the word, I have to get the dictionary. And if I don't remember, I go back to the dictionary. And so I started reading this kid series I actually mentioned it in the book, called the Cherub series by Robert Muchamore, which is a spy series. The first book took ages. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of dictionary. I started in August. Now I'm reading what am I on now? I've just finished number 11. It took me a week in Portuguese as my 3rd language. So did I sit there and go, oh, it's too hard. How am I going to get the amount of words? No, I have a completely different attitude, and the environment is exactly the same. It's not just my attitude or my effort that's going to help me speak Portuguese. It's also called talking to people. It's called listening to the news and relying on a whole host of people to correct you. It's not that I could just magically sit and become a Portuguese speaker, but we never had that attitude because we just talk differently. But that attitude applies to everything.
I think that's the difficulty, right? Because you have this complicated, I think, kind of balance between like, if I say I can't do anything, that's an easy excuse. I don't have to do shit. It's easier. Nothing changes. My life stays the same, whatever. If I accept responsibility and I start taking action, then my attitude becomes a huge factor, because how I look at it will really determine my success. If I look at it as little steps, if I look at it as being possible through small action and through really, accumulation over time, I think is really the way to do it. But I think so much of us miss that because we're also kind of at the same time with technology, there's a lot of emphasis on self-teaching and this idea of sort of like going from nothing to something all on your own. And it's like, well, that's never really true though. It's not like
encouraged.
Yeah, you have to be encouraged. You have to have resources. You have to have people around you. You need, a language. You have to have a ton of different stuff to actually be able to speak it and figure it out and work through it. But anything really, any skill or anything. And then you find stuff. I think we forget too that we find things along the way. Things come up that, make the process better or make our action more powerful or whatever, as we're moving forward, that we never would have had those opportunities if we didn't start. And I the one thing I liked about this book too is that it really emphasized both the difficulty and the lifelong process of it, but also the small gains. And I think the important value of doing it, that you're really taking ownership of the value of the way the world is for yourself or on yourself,
Well, I apply it to I've been thinking a lot about cancel culture recently, not on purpose, but I'm cancel culture is basically please make my problems go away somebody else. It's not about, it's about, because if you think the worst thing that can happen to you is someone makes you feel bad, then you want your safe space, right? If you say, hang on a minute, there's a line here. So I must emphasize that not everybody who wants a platform should have a platform for obvious reasons. Inciting of violence would be an obvious example where that person certainly shouldn't have a platform. But aside from very key examples that any logical deduction would tell you, you're basically saying, I don't feel comfortable, not a Stoic value comfort. Not something we value. I need someone else to help me because I feel triggered. There's no virtue in being triggered, by the way. Because if you don't face the thing that makes you uncomfortable, you can't sculpt the rock that you've been given into something that is of value. And this is the whole sort of cancel culture is please somebody else make it go away, which is exactly the same thing we say about the environment. Please, somebody else, a government, somebody, Coca-Cola, like some other company that's evil.
Other countries push it off on them, right? Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that too. I bitched to you about trigger words before. I don't like them. I don't like that whole idea. It's annoying, and it's not addressing. It's just not facing anything. It's just wanting to turn away from everything that is difficult or uncomfortable in our life. Literally everything that causes us any discomfort. But I think we've talked about this too before, but we're so focused on pleasure and comfort all the time that it really is, I think for a lot of people, it's a real struggle too, to even start, because it's just, what would you say to somebody trying to start, bettering themselves if you were going to take a Stoic approach, what would you recommend?
Know yourself. That's what the Oracle said.
Yeah.
I can't beat the Oracle. There's a reason she got used like that in the Matrix. But like, really, like, know yourself. Like, okay, does that mean, like, I don't like the word triggered. Of course I have buttons, but they're my buttons, right? I have buttons like you wouldn't believe. Some of them I hide and some of them I can't help but have. You know, I can be, if I'm honest, I can be an arrogant arsewipe sometimes. Like, if I really think I'm right, you can tell it in the way that I argue a case, because, particularly if I'm frustrated, then I'll come across as an arrogant idiot. Why? Because I'm an academic and I've trained myself to do that, right? It's silly, right? Because then I know that, oh, now I need to do this because now you're pushing my buttons, you're now questioning my intelligence, and obviously questioning intelligence and authority in academia is a no-no, right? And I apply that in places that you don't really need to apply that. So I know that I can be a dick. Like, that's really important to know that, and to know when and why you're doing it. Like, when I was having an argument recently, you're such an asshole when you're stressed out. And that was really, really helpful, because if they say you're such an asshole, right? I'm like, of course I'm not an asshole. But when they're like, you're such an asshole when you're stressed out, I was like, wait a minute. I was like, I couldn't say anything because I knew. I was like, you're right. Like, that's actually really, really helpful. So my recommendation is, like, ask the people who really, really care about you, when am I an asshole? Not, because then you can sit there and go, that's called knowing yourself. Okay, so I'm an asshole when this happens. That's mean when you act like an asshole, that's because you're being triggered. Right? If you look at it like that, we just call it a fancy word because we don't want to admit that we're assholes sometimes. But if you said, no, that's when I'm triggered, that is when I'm showing you that I'm a knob, that's when I'm being used to. I wasn't going to swear, but you started. So, like, I thought it was out the window in the beginning when I heard, like, two swear. I was like, there's no way kids are going to listen to this. But, like, basically, if I don't recognize what things make me an asshole, I then hide behind the word trigger. But trigger means, this is how I turn into when I'm upset, and that's called being an arsehole. Instead of dealing with my arsehole, nature that comes out and rears its ugly head every now and again, or more often than I'd like to admit, I'm going to blame somebody else. Arsehole behavior, another arsehole behavior. Basically, you're just cultivating your inner arsehole, which, like, literally, you're just getting worse and worse. And that's what we're doing. We're creating that. It's not just like we're using the wrong words. We're going, these people are snowflakes. It's not snowflake, it's arsehole. Not always. And again, there are people, that, should certain people be given a platform to abuse minorities just because? Of course not. Should we protect those people? Of course. We have laws that do that. We have an obligation to do that as Stoics. But there's a difference between, say, being triggered, for example, saying, people get triggered because I might say, this is not my belief, but I could say all trans people are not really the gender they want to be. They're actually what they were born like. Okay, if I provide no reason for that, and I'm saying it in a tone that is not helpful, then obviously, like, we need to question that, and perhaps I shouldn't be given a platform. But one of the things that I often say is, we're having the wrong discussion. There are women that have doped and they run a race. And when they get caught for being doped, they are no longer able to run said race. Women who were born in a different way have effectively doped. They should not be allowed to run, not because they are not women, but because they have effectively doped. Why are we having a different conversation? That is the reason why certain individuals who have gone through, quote unquote, malpuberty, which is, I think, the scientific word, but let's say in case somebody triggered something else, they've gone through a puberty that doesn't align with the puberty they would like to have gone through. That's the discussion. What is the impact of the puberty? Not their identity. The fact that they're male or female legally has no bearing on how fast they can run a race. So why are we having the discussion in terms of identity, for example? We should be having, for example, there was the sprinter, the US sprinter, Marianne, I can't remember her surname, it's gone out of my head, but she was found guilty of doping and she had her medals stripped from her. In fact, Russia couldn't send a whole load of people to the Olympics because of a doping scandal, which was in Icarus. If anybody saw that documentary on,
that was a good documentary.
Netflix. I recommend it if people think.
And it seemed like they sort of definitely did it, though. Also,
yeah, I mean, it was pretty much proven. And so, why are we having this conversation? Why are we saying, for example, that certain people can't run in a female race because they're not women? That's not really the argument here. These are women that have doped. You take away the identity issue and you talk about what's actually happened.
You know, it's funny when you mention that too with sports, because it's like, what was it? Was it Lance Armstrong was the cyclist? Yeah.
Yeah,
Like when they took away his medals, they couldn't even hand out the first place because they couldn't find a rider that hadn't doped, that had won. And it's like, dude, if that's the case, I mean, just change the rules of the sport then, and either let everybody do it because they already are, or, you know, do something different, I guess, but figure out what the problem is, I guess. I don't know. It's like, are we asking,
Exactly.
are we demanding too much? Because we always want it to be faster and better and more exciting. And, you know, it's interesting. I think it's really looking at all these different, you know, yeah, it is. It's looking at all these different nuances and kind of being reflective and self-aware in a way that I think people are not and don't want to be any. People really,
because then you have to solve the problem, right? If I blame identity, I don't actually do anything because your identity is yours. I'm actually saying that these women, they're the problem. Instead of saying, look, for example, in the Paralympics, if you know the Paralympics, you know that people who are more able-bodied, and some people are very, disabled, but they are more able-bodied, they have a different category. They are put in a category and time is added on or taken away from them. For example, if a person with 3 limbs, right, races a person with, say, 2 limbs, that is actually factored into the calculation. So you don't know who won the race in the Paralympic swimming until the end. Like, really, you have to wait till everybody finishes, and then they calculate it based on a fairness factor. It's not necessarily the person.
They really do that? I had no idea.
They have to, because no 2 disabilities are the same, right? It's not. It wouldn't be fair.
No, yeah, it wouldn't make any sense
in swimming, because swimming is it's not all of them, but in swimming in particular, and certain categories of swimming, they do that. So why can't we do that for these women that don't fit which has been historically seen as women, right? Why don't we say, okay, their hips are this size, their hips are male, and that tends to give a 10% advantage, so they can calculate it. It's going to be complicated, but it can be done. Okay, they don't have any muscle mass advantage though, because they never went through a biological male puberty. So because they say they took hormone blockers, for example, so they don't have the muscle advantage, right? So in a weightlifting event, they won't have an advantage. And if they do, because they happen to be a weightlifter and then changed their identity, we can factor that in. We can say, right, their muscle mass, because we know that there's machines that tells you your muscle mass. Their muscle mass is, let's say 15% more than what we would expect. Not the average woman, because we keep talking about the average woman. I don't even know why we're having that conversation. But we are talking about elite women here. We are not talking about the average woman. We should stop this discussion. It's a misnomer. So you say, what is the most elite? For example, the woman who won last year, what was her muscle mass ratio? Okay, the woman that is a different kind of woman. What's her muscle mass? Okay, we need to factor that in, and you do a calculation, and everybody can be in the category according to the gender that they really identify with. I don't see why that's complicated. That involves hard work and calculations and science, but we don't trust science these days. So let's just have an argument that doesn't even make sense, and then get on both sides like these people aren't really women. Does it matter? Is that what matters here? Because to me, it's about fairness in the sport example. If we're talking about prisons, then that's a different issue, right? And it's not an easy issue, but it's not unsolvable if we take away the silly issue, which is who's a woman and who's not. I mean, it's not for me to say who people are, and actually talk about the consequence, the social problem that we need to solve because people want to identify in a certain way. We can do it.
I like what you say there in addressing whether it's solvable or not, because I oftentimes talk about something that I read in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where, poor people will say, I can't afford it. And rich people will say, how can I afford it? And it's the same thing with, it seems like what you're talking about here, where a lot of people are just like, it can't be solved. Everything's wrong, where you're looking at it like, how can we solve it?
Yeah.
And what's the actual issue, right? I mean, because if we don't know the issue, we don't even know how to start addressing it. And I think it's funny too, because we do all this, it's funny. You look at they always call it, like, I gave you an example in environmental ethics. They always call it the Pacific garbage patch. You ever hear of that? Yeah. Which is not actually a garbage patch. And when they first reported on this in the news, they actually got pictures from places that had nothing to do with the Pacific Ocean of like tires in the water and stuff. Because when people hear garbage patch, they think like a dump, but it's really like plastic slurry. But if you think of it in that way, it's also a very different thing to manage. It's not going and cleaning up literal plastic bottles and tires. It's figuring out a way to get this microscopic plastic out of the ocean and out of the water and what to do with it. And it's a ton. It's a lot of plastic. So I think it's funny, like if we don't even have a clear grasp of what the problem is, if we don't even understand the situation, we'll never address it. But once we start thinking in the right way, and I think that's what I liked about the book too, the highlight of just like, look, once we start thinking in the right way and applying this, you start doing it. I think that's true of any practical philosophy. You start doing it more and more in your own life and things improve. But it's not a straight, I think a lot of these popular books are dangerous because they try and create a straight line to success. And it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be a jagged line. You're going to fall back sometimes. You'll get ahead sometimes. It'll be difficult. And it's going to take a long time. And it takes hard work. And I think that's the thing that most people do struggle with,
And you start out the book with just the tragedy of like the boat being destroyed. And like the whole idea of like that quote unquote failure was what spurred his success, and everybody wants to get to the success without that first failure that kind of spurred it on.
It was just sort of it was a historic dig because I couldn't help myself really. We couldn't help ourselves. Whole Silicon Valley success, Silicon Valley Stoicism is become business entrepreneur. Zeno said that was the opposite of success. So okay, so we just had to like sort of from the gate be like, okay, what do the facts that we can gather, what do they say, and how can we make sense of them so that anybody would pick it up would go, wait a minute, this is not your typical self-help book.
Yeah, I like that first story too, though, because I feel like we've all been there in one way or another in our lives where like you have this idea, you're like, yeah, this is gonna work, and then it all fucking falls apart, and you're like, oh God, now what? I'll turn to Stoicism. It'll solve my problems, and I'll be good. Yeah, no, I really like it. It was interesting. It was a good way to start it, though. I enjoyed
it. We just had to, and also like I wanted to show you. I mean, this is a bit behind the scenes, but with you guys, I wanted to show you that I didn't just talk about making the world better in a book. As I'm sure you won't mind me saying, I introduced you to quite a few people to bring on the podcast. Why? Because I believe in your vision. I like the way that you guys work. I think you've been highly successful so far in terms of engagement. I'm really impressed with your listener engagement because you really talk into them. So I was wanting to say, like, it wasn't really what I wanted to show you guys. It wasn't just like Leo and I wrote a book, but behind the scenes that I've just made it publicly known. So it's not like I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or anything, but just to show that I wanted to show you that I do believe in the circles of concern, and I was concerned in the sense of how can I make this podcast that really is going somewhere, in my opinion, better? How can I do that? What can I do to help you guys? Which ultimately will help me because you'll invite me back on, right? So how can we do that? So I wanted to show you that it's not just in the reading or what I'm saying here, but it's actually like behind because you guys never asked me, oh, can you introduce me to anybody? I was like, do you want to be introduced to this person? Do you want to be introduced to that person? Do you want me to be introduced to the other? And you're like, yeah. And so we just did it because that to me is living out what I was saying. Like, I don't necessarily have the biggest platform of the self-help or the Stoic self-help community, but what I do have is I have the conviction that I have a role to connect you and to build my community, because it's only if we build together, there's enough space for everyone to succeed. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a theory. Game theory is a theory. Black and white is a chess match, literally. That's the only thing, black and white. And I wanted to show people that if I can have two things. I can be self-integrated. I want to go on your podcast and I want to use it to like promote my book, ha, ha, ha. Or I could be like, actually, I really believe in your podcast. Yes, I do want to talk on your podcast, but actually, I want you to succeed, right? And then that builds community, right? And then you say, oh, Kai didn't really have any zero-sum game because he actually helped us for no reason. Like, there was no reason. It's not because you guys were like the Tim Ferriss show or something, like, the Stoic quote-unquote podcast. Like, there was no reason. I just saw that your content had value and that you were cool people and that you deserved, in my opinion, and it is only mine, to succeed. But on basis on like spreading virtuous ideas, and that's what I saw you were doing in a very sort of direct way. So that, and I believe in that, and I wanted to show that, and that's what I think is missing, because it is a lot of the time a zero sum. It seems to be that we talk about self-help, and then they'll say this is the truth, this is the story about how I got success. And I know some of those people that have written books, not necessarily Stoic ones, and I know that's not entirely true, because between the successes, they forgot to mention they threw $3,000 at a problem and got the connection that they did. They got the connection through writing a lot of blog posts. Really? Yeah, you did that, but I also know you threw $3,000 at the problem, and it's not just one person. I've had lots of conversations at a dinner table, but people don't need to know that. Or eventually they remember it in a different way, and they'll tell me 2 years later the story as if it's true. And I told them, I know what the original story was. You told me 2 years ago. Oh, because they've just remembered it so many times. They've gone to so many TED Talks that they've said it, or TEDx talks, that they now believe it. I'm like, well, I know.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was just reading something the other day about the garage myth for Silicon Valley companies. So all the Silicon Valley companies have this like a myth of starting up from like a humble beginning to like rapid success. Factually, Hewlett-Packard did start in a garage, and so did Apple. That is true. They were in a garage for very long. But so these companies, all these other Silicon Valley companies like YouTube, all these other ones, were trying to literally create myths about how the company started that were like appealing, and they played on this narrative of two guys or whatever, a couple guys or whatever, coming from humble beginnings, recognizing a problem, going out and solving it. But they never said, like in YouTube's case, they were in a garage for 5 months and they already had like $150 million in backers or whatever at that point. Like it wasn't a humble beginning in any stretch of the word. And I think it's just interesting that we also, I think a lot of times people like those stories too, so they believe the lie as much. And I think you start to miss something or lose something in the process. But I did appreciate what you did too, because I thought that was interesting. You were kind of living up to your values of doing that. I should also point that out, which was nice. It's good to see it in practice.
Yeah, I think like the successes that I've had so far are because I do have a humble background, but I think that I've learned how to interact with people and value them, but not in the sense that you get the story like try and do really good things for good people and they will remember you. No, you also have to be at the same status. So if I do a massive favor for somebody who's much more, let's say a much more famous person than I am, they think that they deserve that, and they think that they're doing me a favor by just replying to my email. And then I'd speak from personal experience like years ago. So it's not true. Like Keith Ferrazzi will say, well, just do loads of people good things and that will work. That's not how it happens. You basically have to see each other as equals in order for that chain of pay it forward / favors / value system to filter through. Because if you don't see that I'm on the same level as you honestly believe that you don't need to do me as many favors. You might do me a minor one, but you're not going to,
well, it's also
keep the hand up on the same level.
Yeah, that's like the idea of building community, right? You want a community that's built of equals that are going to work together and actually help each other rather than, and I think so much we see today now is not that. It's really this alternative story of the individual crushing everyone else and succeeding all on their own and destroying everything in their path, and there's no community, but really just exploitation of everything.
Absolutely.
In the process.
That was another thing that I learned in your book, kind of the difference between like losing a shield and losing a sword, whereas like the shield is a community-based thing and the sword isn't. Oh, a hammer. Yeah.
Helmet.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah. Like, can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Well, I'll ask you what you remember first, and then I'll see if you remember correctly.
Yeah, so basically, like the warriors, the warriors, they have the shield. They make a circle so the shield helps protect the other people around them. I was thinking the sword because that's how they attack and protect themselves, but it's the helmet because that's how they protect themselves.
Yeah. So basically, the Spartans used to, they would stand in, you can actually see this in 300. 300 is an intro. The second one is awful, but the first one's actually quite useful because you can really see they call themselves phalanges or fingers. So the shield would interlock. So if you dropped your guard, you dropped your shield, you're actually harming the person, usually a man, but not necessarily, standing next to you. You were really, told off if you lost your shield because it wasn't just about you. It was literally the shield of the society, of the values of Sparta, because you were leaving the other people exposed to enemy, tactics. If you lost your helmet, it was only your head. So if you lost your helmet and you continued to battle, that was seen as quite, Spartan brave. If you lost your shield, you were seen as being foolish or arrogant, or just very sort of like not really understanding the value of the communal fight. Because when we see Sparta, we see it as a group of individuals, and that individualism in Sparta doesn't exist. You didn't have an individual identity. You were Spartan, and that was your identity. And I'm not going to say
I'm sorry, this is totally out there. Wasn't like the legend of Sparta too, that the laws were written by, I can't remember the guy's name, but then he didn't actually live in the city. Yeah, but he didn't live there, right? That was part of the deal.
I'm not an this is a Leo question. So
I was just throwing it out there if you had any clue. This is just my mind going somewhere. It's okay.
So we did mention Lycurgus, but I can't say Olympics because I didn't do that digging. So if you invite Leo on the podcast, I'm sure he'd tell you you'd keep that. Yeah. I'd be lying if I gave you an answer to that question.
You can lie too. But that's fine too.
Go on.
That was another thing that I got from your book that I never saw in any of the other Stoic books. So the general idea I got from a lot of other Stoic books was just like endure through it, toughen up, grow a pair, and get through it. Like that was like basically the popular Stoicism that I pick up in a lot of other books. The thing that I got from your book and that I really enjoyed, one of the things was this idea of kind of building it up for community. So you talk about that in the shield example we just went over, even like the milk example that we were talking about earlier, where you were talking about how you were not drinking milk because that was your values. But then if you went to somebody's house and they offered you milk and a coffee, you would drink that because it was kind of for the community. And it just kind of opened up this idea that Stoicism is actually about the betterment of the community.
I mean, Zeno wrote a Republic. People, I don't know why. Like, I understand that the Republic, that is like the text, right? So it was entirely about the community. There was nothing individual about it. Basically, if you're calmer, it gives you the headspace to make the right decision for the right reason. That is the only reason that Zeno wants you to feel calmer. It's just to give you the computing power to use a very modern, to be able to take a few more equations and go, right, so I'm not just thinking about myself. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. What is the greater meaning for this? What does it actually mean? So milk, I love ice cream. Okay, no problem with that. And I've had to give up ice cream because now I'm lactose intolerant, because lactose tolerance is actually a very unusual thing in a biological sense. We don't get into that particularly. But I really like rich ice cream, and I can't eat it. And I chose not to eat ice cream on a regular basis because I just don't like the fact that we're treating animals in a way that doesn't allow them to live according to their nature. So it's like, okay, if I honestly believe that we should live according to our own nature, then how can I dictate that other animals can't in such a way that is actually barbaric? It is barbaric. We say that, the Huns are barbaric, but the way that we are treating other animals quite unnecessarily. I understand why we did it because of World War II. We had to have intensive factory farming. We're not living in World War II. This is the problem. We go, okay, it served a purpose at the time. We had to, in the UK, for example, start cultivating our own food because we could no longer rely on what they call now the Victorian Holocaust by moving a lot of the food from India straight to the UK. We couldn't do that anymore because our means of communication and logistics were just cut off by the enemy. And we had to use intensive farming practices. So that makes perfect sense when you've relied on your Commonwealth or your empire for so long and you no longer can. We're not living in that world anymore. And so we say to each other, we should innovate. We need new technologies. Like, why don't you innovate your mind? Innovate your mind first and ask yourself, do you need that technology? Because I'm not anti-technology. I'm more like, what does this technology serve? What's the purpose behind it? Oh, I want to be able to pick packages in Amazon faster. Okay, and what does that serve? Okay, and what does that serve? Okay, and what does that serve? And so why are you not paying your people a fair wage? Where is that question? Like, you can have a machine that picks packages quicker. Does that mean that your staff will have a bigger break? Does that mean that they only have to work 7 hours, but you'll pay them for 8? No, that just means that we're more efficient. We have less people. Oh, okay. So maybe this technology isn't very just, is it? But we're not asking
for better profit margins.
Yeah. A better profit margin, yeah. Be a better profit margin. So this is the question that Stoics should be asking themselves, like digging deeper. That doesn't mean that we have to know all the answers. The sage is not all-knowing. We put that in chapter 1.
And I think that's also that was such an important point that you guys put in the book that I really liked, was that, look, any approach to life, any kind of philosophy that's going to help you and be applied, you're not, I think that's the other kind of misnomer, is that you're not going to be an expert, right? It's going to be difficult. And it's not like all the solutions are going to be readily available or even make sense. They might not even be clear right away. But if you at least start thinking about it carefully and thoughtfully, you start working towards it, and things I think that's the other thing people forget, is we talk about that a lot, is things improve. If you start making those small steps, they do improve and they get better, and things, like you said, right? A better world. Or whatever the hell, I can't remember. Why can I not remember?
Because unfortunately we are there's two problems that I see, the overarching problems, and I'm simplifying for the sake of the podcast, but the hedonic pleasure pain fallacy, that's like the most important, prevents us from asking questions that are uncomfortable. That to me is a fundamental problem, because you're not looking beyond, like, how do I make myself a better person? And also the next problem is that we're consequentialist. So the Stoic example that's really easy to understand is, if I drive a car whilst drunk and I'm lucky enough not to hit anything, am I morally correct? Now, in the eyes of the law, I'm perfectly fine, right? In terms of that, I didn't break, other than that one law. So I broke one law. So I'm just, I got away with it. I'm not a terrible human being, right? Because I broke a law, but I was obviously careful enough not to hit anything. If I hit a tree, am I a bad person? Then probably not. If I hit a cat, well, that's a bit worse because somebody owns that cat. If I hit a child, oh, I'm a terrible human being. This is the problem. And we are very consequential. This is why also we don't want to do anything about the environment, because we look at the consequences of our actions. Like, will this lead to any consequence, basically? Will it be worth me making the effort to drink oat milk, for example, instead of cow's milk, based on the consequence? That's not Stoicism. Stoicism says you were morally wrong the minute you got in the car, regardless of what you did. Because you knew, even if there was no law on it, you knew that operating machinery based on your own, when you drink, what happens to your own mind, even if there's no law, you knew that was wrong.
And it's funny. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned it too, because the consequentialist approach too, you can also use that to say that you didn't even break a law because you didn't get caught. And you were only really guilty if you get caught. I mean, it's insane, but it's true. It's all about protecting yourself and protecting yourself from blame, rather than dealing with anything. And dealing with anything about yourself. Did you want to jump in, dude? Because you looked at me.
Yeah, I was curious what you thought, Kai. Do you think that a lot of the Stoics that you wrote about felt at the end of their lives that they were good Stoics? Or do you think that they felt that they would have had a lot to still work on?
I think Seneca probably would. I was going to think. I think Seneca's quite interesting, because he talks about, he really wants to be the sage, or sage-like. I don't think he wants to be the sage, don't get me wrong. He wants to be sage-like, and he's like, the way he dies is so anti-sage. The reasons for his death are like, you spent your whole life saying you wanted to be sage-like. You couldn't be further from sage-like. He has the opposite of the ideal death, right? He really does. Like, it's all political, and it's not about really, and it's not particularly about virtue. It's more like, oh, well, Nero would order me to, and like, and he kind of like crashes and burns, but I think secretly he might hope that he did his best. I think Cleanthes would feel that he was a complete failure. I think he would say, I didn't do so much. I think Chrysippus died laughing, so he probably had, he probably thought he did pretty good. So it's very difficult to say. I think like all of us can, at some aspects, can say, yeah, I did this really well. I think it's also sensible. It's not, Stoicism doesn't call for false humility. Stoicism recognizes, like, what am I good at? So I would say I'm good at connecting people. Does that make me arrogant? No, that just makes me honest. I think I am good at connecting people. I think I'm good at reaching out to people that I don't know. Am I good at arguing with people via, written? Yes, I am very good, because I can calm down. Am I so good when I'm talking? Possibly not. Do I lose my shit too quickly? Yes, I do. What problem does that create in which circumstance? And I'm not listing my flaws to, again, be, Catholic about it, just to be honest. So I think, again, we go through this sort of false thing of, did I reach it? Did I not reach it? It's like, okay, where did you approximate? We're in progress. Where do you think that we still drowned at the end of the day in the Stoic sense, but where do you think you did really well? And where do you think you didn't do so well? And I think if we're honest with ourselves, so I said the only piece of advice is know yourself, know your flaws, accept your flaws. I'm not going to say I love my flaws. I don't love my flaws. That's just silly. But but I accept them. Like, okay, so I know, like, for example, that if I'm in a certain situation and somebody makes me angry and I get out the arsehole voice, and, you know, people who love me dearly go, you're taking an arsehole voice, then I have to think, like, where am I? Is that possible? Is that likely? Is it likely that I'm doing that? Oh, yeah, probably. Like, because I start to recognize the patterns in my own life. So that's why I said that I couldn't write a self-help book for somebody else, because they might show their frustration in a completely different way. They might shut down. They might do passive aggressive. I don't do passive aggressive. So I have a phrase to all my friends: the minute I stop shouting at you, be worried, because now I don't care. Whilst I'm still screaming at you and losing my temper, which is not good and is not a virtue, but whilst I'm doing that, I still care. If we argue and we're like, if I'm still engaged and obviously I step back and I'm saying I'm really sorry and then we fix it and everything. But if I no longer care if we fix it, and I have had friendship with her, I have nothing else to say to you. And I've said to everybody that I really care about. When I say to that, there's no hope at that point. If I have literally nothing else to say to you, there's no point. Walk away, because that's it. And it takes a long time for me to get there. But then I also recognize, okay, but when you were screaming at this person, though you cared, did you care in the right way, or was you just caring about yourself? And I had to come across this when my nan died, my grandma died, and my dad said to me, you know, sometimes we cry because we miss them selfishly, not because we cry because they died. And I really reflecting on that. And I cried for 2 minutes when she died. And I thought, and at that point, because I cried for her at that point. And I never cried at the funeral. I never cried since. I miss her dearly, don't get me wrong. But I was like, would I be crying because of something to do with her, or because of something to do with me? And if it's to do with me, is there any virtue in crying, or am I just feeling sorry for myself? And I'm not saying somebody shouldn't cry. That was just my reflection. Again, the whole book's about depends who you are. So we say, oh, toxic. We're talking loads of trigger things here, but we talk about toxic masculinity. Well, being able to cry doesn't mean that it's not toxic. If being able to cry is, quote unquote, being in touch with one's feelings, how dare I say or not say that crying means that you, Johnny, are in touch with your feelings? Whereas Randy might say, well, it doesn't mean that for me. It means I'm really angry when I cry. So, like, it depends. Yeah. We don't give each other space to be like, we just sort of classify, okay, if men doesn't cry, that's toxic. If a man cries, it's toxic. I've seen many men cry to manipulate, to gaslight their partner. I've seen it. Like, I've been there, and I've probably done it myself. Like, not necessarily intentionally, but I'm sure I've manipulated at times, and I've cried because I think that's the best way that I can kind of rescue the situation.
I call it method acting. Yeah, but no, seriously. Fuck. Yeah, it's interesting too. I think it's just it's interesting that the level of sort of reflection that goes into it is really so important to highlight, because everything is so different. And I like what you're saying too, because it's like you're constantly making these tiny adjustments, constantly kind of assessing, what am I doing right? What am I doing poorly? Why? How do I factor into this? What are my feelings? What are my weaknesses, my strengths? And in doing that, you're really trying to, you're course correcting towards that good life, right? Slowly but surely, you're making those corrections to your life. And that's really what matters. I think that's a great way to look at it. I love that. Yeah.
I think that's what we basically have. I think everyone has, we're different sized blocks, by the way, because we said again in the book, how dare we say that, Cleanthes had the same possibility of achieving the good life in certain aspects than a very wealthy individual. I think everybody has the same opportunity to reach eudaimonia. I believe everybody can reach it, but I think some people's paths are longer. I really do. I'm not going to say that. I think every human being who's capable of reason and wants to use that reason, because some people don't, really they don't. They want to wallow himself, but it can reach eudaimonia. But to say that everybody's path is the same length, the same width, the same inclination is a lie. And then that's the self-help lie. If you do what I do, you'll reach the same conclusion. You'll reach the same level of success. Well, no. How? For example, if I'm a woman and I want to be a very successful football player, American football player, let's say I want to be the next Tom Brady, how likely is that?
Even if you're a guy, being the next Tom Brady is going to be pretty difficult.
Pretty goddamn unlikely. Difficult. Yeah, he's awesome.
How likely is it for a woman, though? How likely is it for Thomasina Brady to become the next Tom Brady? oh no, you train hard. It's the go back to the toilet roll. And we laugh because it's true, right? But we still buy books. And that's why women are actually the ones that reach out to me and go, thank you so much. Finally, a quote unquote self-help book that makes sense to me. Because you're not saying if I'm aggressive and if I have these targets, if a woman goes into a business meeting in an aggressive way that I have seen that people say in self-help books, she gets ignored, she gets called very unfortunate names, and she gets called a troublemaker and she gets demoted. This is a proven fact. So when you say things like, oh, the gender pay gap, which again, we're talking trigger things here, we're having a very frank discussion. The gender pay gap isn't just about identity of one's gender. It's about if I'm a woman and I act in the same way, do I get afforded the same opportunities? No, that's the gender pay gap. And if we say anything different, we're being very sort of superficial about it.
Well, I think that's, again, going back to that same problem of understanding the actual issues and what is at issue. Because I think so often we really don't know, or we want to politicize it or make it something else in order to just either keep the status quo or protect ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, hedonic well-being, pleasure, pain.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think we covered a whole bunch of stuff today.
This is good. Yeah.
Definitely. Anything else that you'd like to mention in this episode there, Kai?
I think I've covered a whole load of things. I think the most important thing that I could say to people is, like, when you read whatever self-help book, do realize that neither I nor Leo nor anybody else writing does know who you are. And therefore, you've got to evaluate every single action that you're going to take as a consequence in your own context. And so following my advice, because there are bits of advice, I mean, inherently there are, sometimes it might sound like I'm, quote unquote, preaching to you. Like, think about it carefully, because I don't know who you are. I don't know what you need. I don't know what you want. I don't know what your circumstances are. I don't know how much money you have. I don't know how many children you have. I'm still looking at your problem through my eyes, which means this is how I would solve your problem if I were me. And that's not necessarily helpful for you. That would be the one piece of advice that I would leave you with.
That's good advice. It's a good caveat too. You keep mentioning it, so I can't tell if it's reverse psychology and you're trying to flip it, but it's okay. We'll leave it there. I like that though. Yeah. Did you want to add anything else, Randy?
No, I think it's an absolute pleasure to have you. Fantastic book. It was such a good time reading it, and it really was eye-opening for me. Danny and I talked a bunch about it afterwards, so thank you so much for writing that.
Yeah, I just want to second that and say, yeah, it was awesome having you on. It was really nice to finally meet you two, like at least on the screen. And thanks for bringing us into your circle. It's been great, and we hope we will talk to you again soon. The book was awesome.
I'll be on. I'll be back on. No, I will poke you so hard. I'll be back on pretty soon. I've got to wait for something more interesting to say.
All right,
awesome.
That sounds good.
Well, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for episode 33 of the Existential Stoic podcast, here with me, Randy, my buddy Danny, and also awesome co-author of the book Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living in, Kai Whiting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Peace.
All right, cool.